So looking at the map here, we clearly see this is kind of an expanded battleground map based on, state polls, trends, and everything that we've looked at the past 4 years, where we think everything could go, and the states that are filled in blank kind of have a realistic chance of going either way for each party in the 2024 presidential election. And so today I'm kind of going to go over Trump's path to victory in the Electoral College, since he is currently the favorite to win the presidential election. We currently see here, if we go to the polling aggregate as of right now on RCP, if I were to be able to pull that up, we can actually see that the Electoral College map, RCP, kind of has something similar, and we see that RCP currently has Donald Trump up in the popular vote around 8 points more than what he was last time. And so clearly the polls have kind of net shifted towards him. He probably wins the popular vote by about 4 points right now based on that net shift alone. And what we see is the former president doing extremely well in the Electoral College map, to the point where states like Georgia may not even be a problem anymore, but we are still going to include that state since it is kind of trending to the left in the battleground category. And so his paths are very simple. The simplest one, which we may actually be able to project him the winner of the presidency on election night through this, because the way we're going to do it on election nights, we're obviously streaming the results, and what's going to happen is, if it is clear that the national environment is going to be redder than the previous time, depending on how much it shifts. Like if we look at the northern Kentucky counties and Indiana counties, these rural counties, and they're shifting like 10, 15 points to the right, we are for sure going to call all of his 2020 states at poll closings, including Maine's 2nd congressional district, because of that fact alone. It's going to be interesting because he may not be projected the winner of the presidency until a certain point. We may even be able to project him the winner of the presidency without even getting Alaska, which would be pretty funny, and we're going to explain how we do that. The way that essentially works is that we basically call the election here in the US from east to west, and usually people look at polling data and they look at, exit polls out of the state, and they look at the current data, but there's a little bit of a simpler way to kind of call these states. And really, Georgia, Pennsylvania would be the simplest way for that to be called, which is 270, and this would be his simplest path. He could also employ something called a Sunbelt strategy, where he picks up Georgia, he gets Arizona and New Mexico. That would be enough to get him to 267. He could either win through Nevada. That would be sort of like a Sunbelt strategy in a way. He could also win the election through a Virginia, Georgia, and then get Nevada. That gets him to 270 Electoral College votes. He can also kind of have this northeastern path where he kind of wins through Nebraska, 2nd, Maine at large, New Hampshire, and gets Pennsylvania. And then from here, if he were to get those 4 states, which would kind of make sense based on, poll closings, Virginia could put him over at that point. A state like probably Wisconsin can put him over at the top. A combination of New Mexico and Nevada would be able to put him at the top. That would be somewhat interesting. A Rust Belt trio kind of path would also put him to the top. If he were to get his 2020 states and get the Rust Belt, he already gets 279 Electoral College votes. That Sun Belt strategy with Georgia, Virginia, and New Mexico would get him a tie. Nebraska 2nd could bring him to 270 electoral votes as well. I think the most unrealistic path for him to win by, to be honest, is probably through Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire, Maine, and Nebraska, as well as New Mexico. This would be his most unrealistic path, because basically all of these are deep blue states that voted to the left of the nation repeatedly multiple times. And so if he were to win all of these deep blue states that all went for President Biden pretty easily in the last cycle, all of them were basically likely margins in the last election, it would be pretty funny if he won the presidency through that, but that is the most absurd path for him to win. The simplest path would be Pennsylvania and Georgia, and the way we will probably be able to call the election is because if you look at the past few cycles, you see a state like, for example, North Carolina voting to the right of the nation by 6, Florida voting to the right of the nation by 7, Texas voting to the right of the nation by 10, Iowa and Ohio voting to the nation by quite a bit. And in 2012, or actually 2016, we can look at this first. We can actually see in Ohio, Iowa, they were voting a decent amount to the right of the nation, but they trended to the right in 2020. So did Florida. Texas only trended like a point to the left. Some of these deep blue states kind of trended in a certain way. New Mexico didn't actually really trend that much to the left, and Virginia did, as well as Maine. A couple of these did, but these red states necessarily didn't. And North Carolina's trend was actually like perfectly stagnant. It didn't trend at all. And if we look at the trend in North Carolina in 2012, funny enough, the state 5.9% Republican. So it's kind of been trending to the left the past few cycles, like very, very slowly to the left as time has gone on. Like literally, it has basically shifted 5 points to the left over the span of like literally, it's going to probably be like 20 years. And that's a pretty slow trend over a long period of time. And so if the nationwide popular vote is going to shift to the right, I mean, already Alaska and a lot of these would be obvious calls, but if the nationwide popular vote shifts to the right by even a point or two, on election night, we'll be able to call Texas, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa at poll closings. We'll be able to do that. And at that point, if the nationwide popular vote, let's say through exit polls and kind of results and stuff like that, Georgia, I believe, starts counting at like 7 or 8. And so we may be able to call Georgia by a certain time. We would probably be able to call Georgia by probably maybe 9 or 10, depending on how the data looks. I mean, if it's too close to call, it's too close to call. But we're going to be trying to look. Like if Atlanta's mostly in and, you know, the rules are not looking great and Biden's still kind of up in the state, that may be a little bit of a problem. Or if all the rural counties are done and Harris is kind of, you know, gaining in Atlanta still, she may be able to pick it off. Or, you know, we're going to have a team that helps us, but it may actually be easier to call the race than most people think. And if Donald Trump wins Georgia, he's very short of winning. At that point, if the state of Pennsylvania, which is the Rust Belt states that, you know, basically starts counting first, if it's very apparent that Donald Trump is winning by the margin that I have, which in my forecast, he's winning by 6.7%. And at that point, he would probably be leading by a little bit close to maybe 12 or 13 points, you know, towards the end at like 80%. So if he's up 13 points in Pennsylvania at like 80% left to go, more than likely we would call the state, and we'd probably call the other states as well, Wisconsin and Michigan, because these three states have been voting to the right, or at least have been voting together basically since 1992. All of these three states have been voting together ever since then. And so we may actually be able to call the election here at On Point Politics Live before all the other mainstream networks do because of that. Now, clearly, if, you know, Harris is ahead in New Mexico, Minnesota, you know, Maine, New Hampshire, like Nebraska second, like if this is what the toss-up map is looking like by the end of the night, then we clearly can't call anything. But if Georgia's red, this hasn't been called, this hasn't been called, and this hasn't been called, and neither is New Hampshire or Maine, and like maybe Nebraska second maybe is even called already, at that point we would actually be already there. And Alaska, I mean, Trump would be at 268. At that point, I would probably go out as far as to even call Wisconsin and Michigan because of that theorem of the three Rust Belt states voting together, because the way they vote, their demographics are somewhat similar to the point where if one of them goes red, you can basically expect the other two to go red as well. I expect Wisconsin to trend to the left, and I think it may vote to the left of Michigan and Pennsylvania, possibly by like a point or two, but not enough to not be in the blue column. Like it's not going to trend that far to the left. But more than likely, if Pennsylvania goes red, we'll probably be able to call Michigan, just because their demographics are a little bit similar and their population sizes are a bit similar as well. And then shortly after, we'll probably be able to call Wisconsin. And at that point, if Donald Trump's winning those, I probably expect him to be winning Arizona and Nevada at that point. So that's kind of how we're going to be breaking it down on election night. And based on the past that I already discussed, Donald Trump just needs Georgia, Pennsylvania from his 2020 states, and he's already the former president of he would become the president of the United States. And it's funny because these are the two states that the campaign's actually really focusing on. Donald Trump has been, you know, he went to Atlanta, he's spending a decent amount in Georgia, Pennsylvania. Donald Trump's going balls to the wall in Pennsylvania. And so I had actually said, like, if I were to, you know, basically be in charge of the campaign, this is the two states I would go to. These are the two states I think he should focus on the most, because that gets him the exact 270 he needs as well. So If you guys did enjoy this analysis, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you want more content just like this. And I will see you guys in the next video.